today, heavy and thundery at times. Drier and brighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland with scattered showers, a high of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
At More Than, we've learned that understanding your pet is tricky. For example, actually means I've dug some holes in the lawn for you. You're welcome. It's even harder to understand them when they're sick. So More Than Pet Insurance comes with VetPhone, a 24/7 free-to-call health advice line. Plus, new customers get 25% off online now. We do more than.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Good morning, the time is 10:03. I'm Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and you're listening to Speak to Sadiq. Your chance to ask me whatever you want, within reason, on the issues that matter to you. So call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text me on 84850 or tweet your comments to @LBC using the hashtag #SpeakToSadiq. James.
Thank you. Very nicely done. Well, a handover. Sadiq Khan with us for at least half an hour, unless we can sort of barricade the door. So do feel free to get in touch imminently with your questions to him. And I don't want to preempt any of them, but I just want to start with something that's popped up on this programme in recent weeks, since the Grenfell Tower tragedy, actually, and which I wonder whether it's taken you by surprise as much as it has myself and my listeners, which is this practice of decanting, this system under which I won't use the word in cahoots, but certainly in combination with property developers, councils seem to move people out of what was previously social housing in the hope that they will never move back in again. And we saw it yesterday on the Sutton estate. Rachel Venables was picking through the broken glass and 3 wings of the Sutton estate in Chelsea that have been closed down and then rendered uninhabitable, apparently to stop squatters moving in. But lo and behold, when the planning application comes through, the provision of social housing has been decimated.
It's a big issue. The euphemism that is often used is estate regeneration, which in general terms is a good thing. The idea of regenerating an estate, improving the quality of the homes is a good thing. The problem is many developers, councils and housing associations move out those social tenants, improve the fabric of the building, and those tenants can't get a right to return. And so what I've done is, for the first time ever, as a mayor, we're now working on a best practice around estate regeneration. So the expectation is, if you're going to regenerate an estate, there's got to be a right to return for those council tenants. You've got to make sure those leaseholders have the protection in law. And this particular application you're talking about, I objected to, because the number of social homes provided after the so-called regeneration was less than there are now. But also, as Rachel reported yesterday, at a time when there is a housing crisis in that part of London, and there are people in social housing who can't be permanently rehoused or temporarily rehoused by the council, it beggars belief that you've got buildings that are being...
And you have the power to do this, do you?
Well, not the powers in relation to given by statute, but what I'm saying to housing associations and councils and developers is the expectation is you will follow my best practice. And that means consulting residents, tenants and leaseholders. That means making sure there's at least the same number of social housing after the regeneration than there are before, protecting the rights of leaseholders and making sure, in fact, there are more social housing after regeneration than before.
And the other thing that I couldn't quite believe my eyes, especially after the way that Jeremy Corbyn was treated after he suggested requisitioning of empty mansions, is I met someone literally living in the shadow of Grenfell in a former council home that he'd be bought, and he was offered £450,000 for it under this regeneration plan and a sort of compulsory purchase order, and has been told that moving back in after the regeneration, if he wanted to buy anything, he'd have to find at least £800,000 even to get through the door. I mean, this is incredible. This is the deportation of the poor, and it is happening on your watch.
This is one example of many. It's been going on for the last 10, 15 years across London.
Under both governments as well.
And that's why we've got a new estate regeneration best practice where we've consulted on it all summer. We'll be publishing the final version this autumn. And that'll mean this sort of behaviour where leaseholders, and you're giving an example of a leaseholder, is basically not protected, shouldn't happen in the future. But also social tenants should be able to return to the estate once it's been regenerated.
So we get the plan in October, do we? In the autumn? This
autumn, yeah,
okay.
Right.
And that's when we can check to see.
Yeah, that'll address this issue. That also includes, by the way, consulting residents before regeneration. What's happened in the past is tenants, leaseholders, council tenants, tenants from housing associations haven't been consulted when it comes to regeneration, and their rights are taken away from them.
Last bit from me. Did you know that this was happening on this sort of scale before you became mayor? Because my switchboard melted and I couldn't quite believe my eyes. People up and down the country, particularly in the capital, everything from can we have a ballot on whether they're allowed to knock down our block, or hundreds of stories like the one I've just told you. Did you know that this kind of decanting of the poor was unfolding on an industrial scale?
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid the bad news is it's been going on for years. I did know about it. That's why in the manifesto we set out our plans how we were going to address this. Obviously, the more powers government can give me, the better. But in the meantime, we're not sitting on our hands. We're making sure we work with councils, housing associations and developers to make sure the social fabric of our city doesn't change as a consequence of these so-called estate regenerations.
OK, maybe too late for some corners of the capital, but we shall have a good look at that in the autumn. Should we go to the phones?
I think the first caller is Noor from Kensington. Noor, I hope I've got your name right.
Yes, you have, yeah. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Noor.
Yes, how are you?
Good, thank you. What's your question, Noor?
My question, have all the other London tower blocks been made safe, not to have a repeat of Grenfell? What have you done to reassure people that it will not happen again? I have other questions. I'm just going to take the opportunity, because a lot of the people who are working on Grenfell also are not getting the support. They have been doing...
It's a terrible phone line, Nora. I'm going to go with the question that you've asked. Have you made the other towers safe? And what was the other bit of it?
Yeah, so not to have a repeat of Grenfell.
Yes, OK. So
Thanks, Noor.
what's in place? What's happened?
Noor, thanks for your question. So I've been attending the task force meetings the government's organised in relation to what's followed from the awful tragedy at Grenfell Tower. One of the first things that I sought to do is make sure that literally those thousands and thousands of families around the country, in fact, not just London, who live in tower blocks, have the reassurance that they go to bed at night and they're sleeping in a safe building. The London Fire Brigade in London have been carrying out safety checks in all the tower blocks in London. Some of them, the responsibility of the council, some housing associations, some private developers, some are office blocks actually, Noor. And the London Fire Brigade have been working around the clock to do these fire checks. They are impartial. They will give recommendations to councils and others. You'll have seen on the media, Noor, Camden, for example, recently asked their residents to leave the tower blocks whilst the remedial work was undertaken because the LFB, the fire brigade, had said the tower block wasn't safe. And by the way, it's not simply cladding or the type of cladding, it's the way it can be installed. It's other maintenance work undertaken by councils and housing associations and developers over years. For example, not making sure the doors self-close, not making sure that the remedial work is fireproof materials rather than plywood and stuff. So those checks are taking place as we speak. I'm reassured from the government that the councils and housing associations have undertaken their checks, but there's also things like halls of residence, hospitals, office blocks, and all those are taking place as we speak. But we've got to make sure we're vigilant because, when people talk about the need to get rid of red tape or the need to reduce regulation or so-called health and safety being an issue, they're talking about, the quality of our buildings being safe and secure. And that's why we've got to make sure we don't allow those who want to cut corners to allow our buildings to be unsafe.
Do you think corners are cut on a regular basis?
I think they have been in the past, without any doubt. I mean, if you speak to the leader of Camden Council, she will tell you about some of the reports given to her by London Fire Brigade about one of the reasons why they were saying those blocks weren't safe. And what we've got to do is make sure that whether it comes to sprinklers being installed, checking fire alarms, checking self-closing fire doors, when it comes to maintenance work, when it comes to, for example, things being built next door to a tower block that prevent a fire engine having access there, all those things are addressed. And that's
especially as residents often object. It's not party political, this, is it, Sadiq Khan? Because the councils you describe are just as likely to be Labour as they are Conservative.
Camden is a Labour council. KNC was a Conservative council. And I think you made the point in response to an earlier question. This is successive governments and successive councils. But I'm afraid we can't allow the words regulation, red tape and health and safety to be always seen in a negative and pejorative way. They're not. They're there for a reason. The next question, I think, is also from Kensington. This is from Jem, and it's from North Kent. Jem, hi, morning.
Good morning, Sadiq Khan. As you'll know, there's huge regeneration master plans, the Notting Barn South master plans in the North Kensington area surrounding Grenfell, which are currently on hold for 6 months. What I'd like to ask you is, is there a way that you as mayor and the GLA can commit to working with the residents and local affected community to oversee the proper transparent consultation happens by ensuring that residents are involved in the decision making at all levels and every step of the process, and that regeneration will not be allowed to continue, and this last bit is of utmost importance, that regeneration will not be allowed to continue without the residents' vote?
The answer is yes. We will make sure the process is done properly. And the good news is because it hasn't happened already, there are things we can do. I'll give you an example where my hands are tied to an extent. There was a master plan and regeneration around Earl's Court before I became mayor. And I'm afraid because that's in the past, I couldn't get involved. I can get involved in relation to this regeneration. How they consult residents is a matter of discussion, and there are different methods used. Some people suggest balloting, some people via a form of survey, some people suggest going door to door, some people suggest public meetings. It's horses for courses, Jem, and so we'll have to work with the council to make sure we get it right. The good news is, and this is not a party political point, it's just a fact, next May there are council elections across London. And you'll be aware as a local resident, there'll be different parties standing in that election, and there'd be an unwise prospective council candidate who stands for election without promising to consult local residents properly, particularly when it comes to a master plan that can lead to a regeneration, either bringing benefits to the area, or as James alluded to in answer to a previous question, having people deported from the area, exported from the area, which is what nobody wants.
What about some form of vote? Because it seems astonishing that you can, in a functioning democracy, you can see your own borough essentially disappear and have no say in whether or not you want the process to begin.
I mean, it's what method is used for consulting local residents, and it's horses for courses. It depends how big the cohort is, how big the residents are, how big the estate is, how many people are involved, and Jem, also you'll be aware there are some people who haven't got access, for example, to the internet. So if you just did surveys via the internet, that would be unhelpful. And that's why it's a matter of horses for courses. Sometimes it's going door to door and speaking to residents. Sometimes it's given, surveys you can use a pen and paper with. Sometimes it's via the internet. Sometimes it's public meetings. And so what's important is the decision makers, whether it's a council or when it comes to things I'm involved in as the mayor, we use the correct methodology to maximise the response from residents. Because the reality is, Jem, you know your community far, far, far better than officers and councils working in the town hall, or dare I say us in City Hall.
Yes, I just wondered if we could have your commitment that you will oversee this.
Well, I've got no powers to step in. What I can do is make sure the council consults properly. And if, for example, it comes to me for decision, some big plans come to me for decision, I look at process as well. And my New London plan that I'm working on, Jem, part of the New London plan will say my expectation is when it comes to receiving monies from me, when it comes to me giving a green light for permission, is the consultation is done properly.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jem. Thanks for your call.
Before we move on to the next one, with your lawyer hat on, of course, you were a solicitor before going into Parliament. How significant is it that the country's top prosecutor has said that individuals found to be responsible, if they are found to be responsible for the Grenfell Tower disaster, they could actually face personal criminal charge?
Well, I think it's very important that the DPP, Alison Saunders, gives that reassurance to local residents. The one thing that's, I think, shocked many of those people from outside the area is the lack of confidence residents have with the establishment.
Yes,
with justice being done.
It's quite incredible.
And it's not improved, I'm afraid, with the passage of time. Now, you'll be aware that a few weeks ago, there was talk about corporate manslaughter charges potentially being brought. The problem with that was that leads to, at maximum, a fine to a company. And what local residents want is justice, and that includes if individuals are responsible, and the legal phrase is, gross negligence manslaughter, then they'll have their day in court. And I think Alison Saunders' words yesterday are reassuring to residents, but actually the proof will be in the pudding. And the police are working incredibly hard. Outside of a terrorist crime, the number of officers involved in this investigation is the largest for criminal activities, more than 250 officers involved. And the key thing will be making sure justice is not just done, but justice is seen to be done as well.
I think we're staying in the Royal Borough for the next one.
And that's as we should. The next call is from Andrew, also from Kensington. Andrew, over to you, mate.
Hi, morning, Sadiq.
Hi, morning, Andrew.
I was calling about the Sutton estate, which you said you were sort of aware of, and that. And if you are aware of the social cleansing, if you are aware that they're smashing up the place and kicking people out of the borough, why are you giving the company Clarion 170 million of our money for social housing or to build affordable housing. I mean, the two seem incompatible. Everyone else seems supportive of us and of the Sutton estate, and you seem to be going and giving money to the people who want to smash it up and put up luxury flats. Thanks,
Aaron. Let me disaggregate. There's a number of different points that you've raised. So the first issue is the plans of Affinity Sutton in relation to the Sutton estate. And I've objected to those plans, and I'm actually, to give credit to the council, so the council objected to those plans. There'll be a public inquiry.
The fear is that the plans were rejected before this process of deliberate damage took place, and the fear is that renders it somehow a softer target for a planning application, because you can say, well, look, no one can even live in it now, so why can't I build a bunch of luxury developments here?
No, well, the chair of the public inquiry is not naive, and the chair of the public inquiry will recognise that if this has been a device used to try and influence his or her decision, that won't be allowed to happen. And I'll be making submissions, Andrew, to that public inquiry, as I'm sure residents will. I think you've got until August the 18th to respond to the public inquiry. The second issue is in relation to me working with housing associations across London to make sure we build genuinely affordable homes across London. And I've reached a deal with the government to make sure we build more homes in London. I want to make sure they're genuinely affordable. And what I've done, Andrew, is reach a deal with 8 different housing associations. You're right, one of them includes a successor to this housing association, and that will lead to 38,500 homes being built in London, of which at least 60% will be genuinely affordable. And what I'm able to do, Andrew, because of the estate regeneration best practice I'm consulting on now, is make sure in any future estate regeneration, no social tenants or leaseholders will have their rights less strong than they are now. They'll have a right to return. There'll be proper consultation, and we'll make sure that in the future, post the London Plan, post the state regeneration best practice, we kind of what's happening now in K&C.
The meat of Andrew's point, though, is that Clarion is one of these organisations that has in the past been involved in some of the decanting processes that leave so many residents frightened of the future or regretful of the past. And he wants to know why you've handed over, or you've got into bed with an outfit that is essentially. Am I right, Andrew? You think that their track record suggests that they're.
Two things.
Go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're giving away 170 million, you use it as a negotiating tool. You try and save social housing. And secondly, the right to return for people in those houses. They've thrown out most of the people, Sadiq. They're destroying social housing in the area. You know, if you're giving away the money, use it as negotiate. If you're not up to it, you and James Murray, your deputy, should know better.
Well, thanks for your comments, Andrew, but I think with respect, the reason why I think your criticism is unfair is there are conditions attached to this money going forward, number one. Number two, we've made sure that 60% minimum of these homes will be genuinely affordable going forward. But also, you'll be aware, Andrew, as an expert in this area, that there are many, many councils across London, many, many housing associations across London who in the past have been involved in estate regeneration that we both will be critical of. The key thing is in the future, they can't do this. And I can reassure you that not only did I object to these plans, as did the council, but also I'll be giving evidence to the public inquiry as well. What I can't do is retrospectively change what's happened in the past. What I can do is make sure it doesn't happen in the future.
The problem is we see your officers and your deputies and yourself being wined and dined by the PRs, by these developers, by these housing associations, and suddenly they get 170 million and social housing disappears from the area. And the two seem totally incompatible.
What would proof look like to you, Andrew? And then I can hold the Mayor to account in that search for that proof over the coming years.
One, that at least the same number of social housing is maintained in that area and not pushed out to other parts of Kent Chelsea or up to the north or out of London. Two, that that if he's giving away our taxpayers' money to these people, that he negotiates with them first, that he says that no, this regeneration will not go ahead, the demolition of these houses will not go ahead. I mean, we want to see him supporting Londoners, not acting for the interests of these developers.
I think both those conditions are very fair and very reasonable. Okay. And so, and the promise to you, Andrew, is we will make sure that in relation to future estate regeneration, that a number of social homes are not less, they're at least the same, if not more. And secondly, I can tell you this, you speak to the housing association, you speak to the council, you speak to developers, And none of them will say that I'm, easy to negotiate with. And actually, we've negotiated. So over the next few years, by 2021, there'll be 60,000 new homes started in London. Out of those, 60% will be genuinely affordable. And I mean genuinely affordable, either social rent, council properties, and or London living rent, a third of average earnings, linked to earnings, not market value rent, and or shared ownership part rent. No mayor in the history of London has been as ambitious as I have, and my new London plan will be the proof that you require.
I want to see the proof, though. You talk about ambitious, but we haven't seen anything yet, Sadiq.
Well, I've not published a London plan yet, Andrew. So I'll publish a draft London plan towards the end of this year. I'll also publish the final estate regeneration best practice. No previous mayor has had estate regeneration best practice. And wait and see my draft London plan this year. And if you're still unhappy, of course, you can respond during the formal consultation around my London plan.
Okay, we wait and see. But, I mean, from your record so far and what's happened so far, you really have a lot to prove.
Well, let me deal with that, Andrew. Well, let me deal with my record. In the last year, Boris Johnson was the mayor of London. The number of homes given permission that were affordable, and that's his dodgy definition, was 13%, 13. For those applications that have come to me for approval, in the space of a year, that's increased from 13 to 39%. So I think you've got to be a bit fair, Andrew.
So I appreciate that
I do need to get some other calls on, Andrew. So
okay, I'm sorry.
No, you carry on, but just be concise.
I appreciate you trying. You know, I supported you, Sadiq. I voted for you in the hustings. I voted for you in the election. And if this is the way I feel about how your office is behaving, if this is the way I feel about the way your officers and your deputies are being wined and dined by the developers and by the housing associations who are taking away Londoners' rights, then how do you think the rest of Londoners feel? We want to see some action from you.
Well, listen, I'm not sure about the wine and diner. What I do know is that we've got a good deal from the government. We're in negotiation with housing associations, councils and developers to make sure we can build the homes we need in London. But it's the right sorts of homes we've got to build. In the meantime, I think you're right to hold me to account in relation to estate regeneration. You're right to be worried about the hollowing out of social housing, particularly in central London. And I think you're right to set me a challenge. And my job as the mayor is not simply to, in real time, to give you the confidence as a Londoner you deserve, but also to make sure that over the next few months and years we build the homes we need. And that's what I want to do, Andrew.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see. We will see what happens.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the call. Thanks for engaging.
I hope you feel, Andrew. I mean, I kept very quiet during that exchange, so you'd have the opportunity to come back at the mayor. You mentioned Boris Johnson. What's happened to the Garden Bridge money? Why hasn't the trust been wound up?
Well, the money that Boris Johnson gave to the trust has been spent by the trust.
So that's £50 million of our money, and as I understand it, the wealthy investors only made pledges, so none of them have actually lost any money.
Absolutely right. And that's one of the
well, how are we going to get it back? Who's going to hold Boris to account?
One of the criticisms of Dame Margaret Hodge in her report was the fact that there was no incentive for those who'd pledged money, these rich donors, to actually give the money over. These are pledges, not actual money. As a consequence of the deal made by the previous mayor, monies were given to the trust by him and by the government. That money's been spent. I'm quite clear no more of taxpayers' money over which our responsibility will be
But have we
spent.
waved goodbye to the 50 million then? Is that?
It does look that way, yep, because it's been spent.
And there's nothing you can do to sort of chase the man who spent it?
No.
I know where he is. He's in the Foreign Office.
I tell you why, because the previous mayor signed what's called a mayoral direction, which means the money gets transferred from TfL, Transport for London, over to the Garden Bridge Trust. They will say, and Dame Margaret Hodge looked into this, they've spent the money, and so
without laying a single brick.
No building work's begun, no construction has
£50
begun.
million pounds.
They've also not resolved the issue of ownership of land on the Coin Street side of the south side of the proposed bridge, and this is one of the reasons why I'm criticised by Tory members of the Assembly for having reviews. This is why I asked Dame Margaret Hodge to undertake this review, and it does beg a belief, and that's why once I considered the review from Margaret Hodge, there's no way I could authorise any further expenditure of taxpayers' money.
And the trust still in place? The kids' company directors are probably going to be banned from holding directorships in the future. Could you do something similar with this trust that has blown 50 million quid's worth of taxpayers' money with absolutely nothing to show for it?
The government can, I can't. I haven't got the powers. Okay. And so it's an issue for the government.
Do you think they should?
Well, I think there are serious questions to be asked.
Do you think that the trustees should be banned from similar positions?
Well, they would argue if they were here That
Well,
the
they're not.
mayor
I want to know, do you think they should be?
Well, I think I echo the comments of Dame Margaret Hodge, which is serious questions that should be asked about Boris Johnson, about processes used, but also by the fact there's no evidence of value for money with the money that was given to the Garden Bridge Trust from the government and also from the previous mayor.
Okay.
The next question is from a Pilgrim it says Kennington here. Should that be Kensington?
No, it's Kennington. That's why I underlined it.
Sorry,
so that you've just had four
Pilgrim,
calls from
I'm
Kensington.
sorry. I'm sorry, Pilgrim, and also listeners, and pains me to apologise to James as well for not being able to read his handwriting. Pilgrim, over to you.
Hi. Yes, so I'm phoning about two things, both in relation to regeneration. The first is I wanted to talk more about consultation, and the second issue that I think a lot of people would like to talk about is the Haringey Development Vehicle, and to question why Sadiq Khan hasn't spoken out in support of residents, particularly in view of the poor consultation that's happened there, and the huge impact of that project, which I'll just explain, is effectively putting £2 billion worth of council-owned, publicly owned land, property and business premises and into a private development vehicle, which is going to be 50% owned by a huge multinational property development company, which has got a very sketchy history when it comes to involvement in public housing projects in London.
OK, let me do both those questions, Pilgrim. First, in relation to consultation, I've been quite clear. Process matters. Good process leads to better substantive decisions being made. And that's why I'm the first mayor ever to, for example, try and work towards an estate regeneration best practice guidance. And because I believe in consultation, I've spent this summer and spring consulting Londoners about what should be in the best practice guide. And we've, by the way, had a record amount of submissions in relation to our estate regeneration best practice. So that's in relation to consultation. I think is very, very important. And by the way, if you look at some of the responses that we've received around air quality, around some of our transport plans, some of our policing plans, the largest number of Londoners responding to plans from mayors than ever before. And I'm hoping the London plan that they'll publish, the draft one later on this year, will also have a large number of respondees responding to that. In relation to the specific question you asked, the reason why often you won't see me getting involved is because I have what's called a quasi-judicial role. So often some of these things come to me for decision making later on in the process, and if I express an opinion early on, I can be accused of being prejudiced. So when it comes to me being quasi-judicial as a functionary, when it comes to a planning matter, not unreasonably, a developer or a council will say I'm prejudiced, and they may make an application to have me excluded from decision making. So I know it's frustration, Pilgrim, in real time when I'm not responding to things as they're being discussed. But often there's a reason why, and I think in the particular case you're referring to, it could well be that application, because it's so big, comes to me for sign off, and that's one of the reasons why I can't get involved at this stage.
Right. Okay. I mean, going back to consultation, what I did want to talk about was in your draft consultation guidelines that you wanted submissions of, the actual residents themselves, the group called Demolition Watch, have specifically requested that tenants are able to ballot on the outcome of their estates. Now, I know a caller mentioned this earlier on, but this is really crucial because all of these councils will say that they've consulted. And if it's the decision makers forming the form of consultation, all consultations can be managed to be convenient to the people who are looking for particular outcomes and particular answers.
Pilgrim speaks for a lot of people here, and you've got a big problem as Mayor of London, as a Labour Mayor of London. They expect a politician like you to be on their side in a way that perhaps they wouldn't have, rightly or wrongly, they wouldn't have expected Boris Johnson to be. And what she describes is a system that they don't feel is fair, constantly up and down from Elephant and Castle to Kennington to Kensington to Earl's Court. Everywhere you go, people think there are stitch-ups unfolding. You mentioned you're not aware of the wining and dining. It's on the GLA website. You can see for yourself where your officers receive hospitality from some of these people involved in these developments.
To be fair, they call us the deputy mayors.
Well, all right then. Okay, but people in your kind of operation, it goes on all the time, and that's how it looks from the outside. Pilgrim is a tireless campaigner in this field. I met her at Grenfell Tower where she's been doing work. How can you offer? You can't just say I'm publishing a plan in October.
Well,
I know it's true, and I know you are, but they need something. They need some meat. They need something to reassure them that it's not going to be another stitch up. That they're not going to be shunted out to the other end of the country or the city, and that their home will still be their home 2, 3, 5 years from now.
Sure. I mean, the issue is how people are involved in estate regeneration. And so just to state the obvious, which I've said before, but I've got to say it again, for the first time ever, we're having a best practice for estate regeneration. We're consulting on it, and Pilgrim is articulating a view that many others have articulated, which is how you consult.
Yes.
Because often it's a
They've heard it all before.
Well, they haven't, because no previous mayor's done this.
They've heard the word consultation. They've been promised that the voices of locals will be heard, and then they'd close their eyes for 5 minutes. There's a whopping great penthouse where their flat used to be.
Which is why we're consulting on what should be in the best practice. Now, one of the methods that people have said to me they want to be consulted on is by a ballot. Now, what I'm saying is, I think, by the way, I'm not prejudging the outcome of the best practice, which will be published shortly, but one of the ways could well be a ballot. What I don't want to do is have a one-size-fits-all from City Hall.
Just give us a date then. When will we be able to say, this is how you get your voice heard?
It'll be this autumn.
But you're still saying it might be a ballot, it might be this, we'll do a bit of that.
But the draft talks about a number of options to the housing association or the council in relation to how they conduct the consultation. So I think what Pilgrim is articulating is it must always be via balloting. Now, what I'm saying is, without prejudice to the final best practice report, that could well be one of the ways that a council or a housing association consults, and the presumption may well be it'll be a ballot. We've got to give flexibility, though, for other forms. It could be, for example, surveys. It could be going door to door, because some people may not respond to a ballot. You'll know the turnout when it comes to elections, let alone estate regeneration. So the issue is maximising the response from the residents. That's what I want to do.
And that is the plan. What would failure look like? You sit here in November or December of this year, you've published your plan, you've done your consultation, you've got your regeneration master plan in place, and you will look me in the eye and say it hasn't worked. If what happens?
I'll give you one example of what failure would look like, is if there was an estate regeneration next year and the percentage of residents involved in the decision making was fewer than there was in, for example, the Affinity Sutton one, that'd be failure.
Okay, so we're going to start counting. We're going to start looking at the numbers properly.
And also you want to see changes and nuances from the decisions made by councils and HAs. Often residents want their estate to be regenerated, but it's how you do it. It's involvement in the decision-making process. There are some examples of good practice that I've seen, some examples of really, really bad practice.
Where?
Good practice, Islington. Some of the estate regeneration there has been very good. Some of the historic practices in Southwark have been awful.
We've got time for one more, I think.
The next question, if James gives me the piece of paper, which is on his side, is for Lee from Bromley, not KNC. Lee from Bromley. Hi, Lee.
Yeah, good morning, Sadiq.
Hi,
good morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Just a quick one. You keep saying about these deals you're doing with housing associations.
And councils.
Are these... Yeah, you are doing, because I can't see any council houses being built.
We are. Good question.
I live in the London Borough of Greenwich. They've knocked the Ferrier estate down, which was about 2,500 homes, right? Don't get me wrong, it needed knocking down. 26 years ago, when I put my name down for a council place, it was, I don't get nothing in the Ferrier because it was a dump back then. But now, it's not been rebuilt by the council. It's been rebuilt by Berkeley Homes. And they're knocking them out for £505,000, affordable housing. Now, your big thing was, my old man was a bus driver, bought his hair. On his bus driver wage, could he buy a £500,000 house?
No, and that's one of the reasons why I've changed the definition of affordable housing, Lee.
Just remind people what you've changed it to.
So, Lee, what it used to be, affordable housing under Boris Johnson was 80% of the market value of a property, right? Which basically, forget a bus driver, even somebody on a good salary like an LBC presenter couldn't afford. And so what we've done now is we've changed the definition. So it's one of three things, Lee. Either a council rent, social rent, and that's the formula is basically manual worker, like bus drivers and those who are manual workers, and or it's a third of average earnings. So it's linked to earnings rather than market value, and it's a third. And so the average earnings in Greenwich is different to the average earnings in Camden, for argument's sake. So it's to recognise that. And the third part of the definition is shared ownership, part by part rent. So you're rightly. That my old man couldn't have afforded to buy a property in 2017 as he could in 1979. The second issue is, though, you're right, we've got to make sure councils start building homes again. So we're giving them monies. Your money, by the way, it's taxpayers' money I'm giving them. It's not my own money. I'm giving them your money to help them do so. One of the problems that councils say to me, though, is the difficulty in them being able to borrow money to build homes is a big issue for them. So I'm lobbying the government to change the rules around that. But I'm also helping councils by helping infrastructure. So I'll give you an example in your neck of the woods. So we've made sure, for example, across the river in Barking and Riverside, we have a new extension on the London Overground, and that will lead to good public transport links, which means the brownfield land can be used to build genuinely affordable homes. And people criticise me, you've heard callers this morning, about reaching deals with HAs and councils. Part of the conditions I've attached to them getting that money is, 50, 60, 70, 80% is going to be genuinely affordable. And that's one of the three definitions I've talked about, rather than the con of 80% of market value. It will take time, though, Lee. It will take time. And the phrase I've used, though, is it's a marathon, not a sprint. Why? Because over successive decades, we've not built the number of homes. The right to buy, a great idea on the one hand, the ability to buy your council home, only if you build council's homes to replace them.
No, cancel that. You're not listening to the point.
I am. I think he wants to know why housing associations have to be involved at all. Why can't these properties be built by councils without a middleman, without any money making its way into the pockets of developers?
There we go. Brick and mortar and labour, £80,000. You're telling me the council can't get hold of that sort of money? Because we used to. No. Listen, I grew up in the 70s. Everyone I knew lived in a council estate. I knew two people out of about 400 going to two schools that mum and dad had their own hair. Everyone else, they lived on Morris Walk Estate, Marion Grave Estate, Woolwich Arsenal Estate.
To the point, Lee.
Loads of estates. So what has happened to all these estates, and why can't we build more? We're supposed to be progressing. All we seem to be doing is going backwards as a nation. The big thing now is you've got to buy. No, why can't we just have council rent again?
It's a very good question.
And councils were encouraged to bid for the money, and councils did bid for the money, and councils that bid were successful. Lee, I can't give money to councils that aren't bidding for the money. I'm not really sure what you want to do.
Can you build a house without also having a property built alongside it that a developer is going to make a profit on?
So some homes we can, and so some of the developments on TfL land, you'll see, James, is 100% affordable. Some of the land, some of it is 50-50.
But what's the difference? I think Lee wants you to tell him what the difference is between affordable and council.
So part of the definition of affordable is council. So social rent means council properties, basically. So maybe I wasn't explaining myself clearly, Lee. So some of the new homes that will be built will be council properties. And so some will be council properties. The issue isn't us not giving the councils the monies. The issue is the councils themselves having problems in relation to land allocation, infrastructure and monies from government. And so if councils bid for the money, they will get the money.
But it won't be a council house in the old-fashioned sense, because...
Oh, no, some will. No, some will. To be fair, some councils are building old-fashioned council homes with
but only on property they already own.
On land they already own, yeah.
So if it's, okay. Lee, does that help?
Well, it does and it don't, because they own the land on the ferry up at Berkeley Homes rebuilt it. So how's that helping? That's 2,500 council houses you lost there. That's helping no one. There's just people moving into the area that have got the money.
That is the perception. I mean, this is before your time, but it's still the perception is that it...
Just to defend councils for a moment, because I think it's important to defend councils. I mean, councils want to build council homes, and what often they do is they allow some of the homes on a piece of land to be market rent, market sale. So that revenue stream allows them to build more council homes, because councils themselves have had half their budgets cut over the last 7 years. They're having to close down libraries, reduce services they provide to the public, and they need revenue streams, Lee, with respect to build these homes. So I'm not going to criticise the council for trying to build also market value properties to sell if that provides a revenue stream to provide other essential public services or to build council homes. And the councils have lost, some councils, half their monies over the last 7 years.
I think we're about 11 minutes over time.
Well, James, thank you very much for having me on again this month. Hoping to come back again next month. And for those listeners who couldn't call in, feel free to tweet directly to me or tweet James, who I'm sure will hassle my office for me to give a response.
And of course, we've confined our conversation entirely to housing regeneration and Grenfell Tower
related issues. It's a big issue. It is the number one. I mean, housing is the number one issue facing London. I've used the phrase that there's a housing crisis, but also I've explained as well as I can, James, that it took us decades to get to this problem. I'm afraid it'll take us some time to solve this problem, but I'm determined to start the the process of fixing the housing crisis.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks indeed. The time is 10:42.
This is LBC.
Hey, it's teamwork here. Do you know I could work more effectively for your business if your phone system is a Vonage phone system? That's because Vonage offers so many features that help with teamwork, like